I'm Dave Greenwood, and this is Overcoming Distractions. If you are an adult with ADHD, a busy professional, an entrepreneur, a high achiever, or just need some strategies to navigate your adult ADHD, you're in the right place. Who am I? I'm an entrepreneur with ADHD and the author of 2 books, Overcoming Distractions and Overcoming Burnout. I coach and mentor people just like you, and together we navigate the ups and downs of adult ADHD. From getting out of our own way to helping people just like you thrive in the workplace. That's what I do. Want more info on working with me? Hit overcomingdistractions.com. Ready? Let's get to today's podcast. All right, gang, we are back. You know who you are. You are on Overcoming Distractions. And if you are that busy adult with ADHD, with a demanding career, you're a high achiever, you got a lot of other things going on in your life, then you are in the right place. Even if you suspect you have ADHD, then all are welcome. So if you're just that distracted type that needs a little bit of support, we are here for you. So if you have enjoyed any type of benefit or advice, or you have gotten anything out of the podcast and you want to buy me a cup of coffee to support the awakeness that I need to grind these out every week, you can just go to buymeacoffee.com/overcomingd. I live on coffee. I don't speak to anybody in the house until I drink my coffee. So it is an important aspect of my life. So it's buymeacoffee.com/overcomingd. And that's the pitch. Now we're going to get down to business. So we're talking burnout today. We talk about burnout a lot on this podcast. I think those of us with a distracted brain sometimes can maybe burn out harder and faster than our other colleagues. I'll say it that way. But we can chat about that when we dig into it. But we're going to dig a little deeper today because we're going to talk about what burnout can actually do to our body. And I've said this numerous times, but I think we throw the term around burnout a little too loosely here, especially on social media. And maybe we can chat about that briefly as well with our guest. The other thing I've said is burnout is complex. And I've mentioned that many times. I think sometimes we see and hear a simplistic view of burnout. So we're going to dig into that. For example, I believe that not all burnout is rooted in the workplace. You may have caregiving responsibilities, which are just adding to that chronic stress. You have a demanding career. You have all sorts of other things going on. And then maybe you're taking care of an aging parent or a situation like that. But I know this from talking to many of you, that burnout over time can do some horrible things to you and your body. This ends up as trauma. And in my book, Overcoming Burnout, I interviewed people who had heart attacks, miscarriages, endless digestive issues. And I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm just saying this to keep it real, because burnout unaddressed can wreak havoc on your body, your life, your mental health. So let's get into burnout and what it does to you as a human. Today, I have clinical psychologist Dr. Claire Plumbly. She is the author of The Trauma of Burnout: How to Manage the Nervous System Before It Manages You. So welcome to Overcoming Distractions.
Hi, David. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. This is we do talk about burnout a lot here. We talk about sometimes the mechanics of burnout, like how to take care of yourself and how to, set boundaries and some of the typical discussions. But I don't think we've really dug into what this can really kind of do to us as humans and how bad it can get. And again, I don't like to scare anybody, but I have talked to numerous people that it has they've had to take leave of absences from work and all these things because they just couldn't function anymore. But before we get into that, I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about your work, your practice, what you do when you're not sitting on podcasts.
There's quite a few of them at the moment as I launch my book in America. But yeah, I do have a life outside of that. So I worked in the NHS until 2017 as a clinical psychologist, working one-to-one with a lot of clients with trauma and burnout and sexual assault, actually. And then I moved from London to Somerset, which is in the southwest of the UK, just below Wales, for anyone who knows the UK a little bit, and set up my own private practice. And now I have a group of associates, and we're called Good Therapy Limited. And I sometimes run online workshops. I enjoy creating content on social media, Instagram, TikTok, Substack. And then, yeah, my biggest baby recently has been this book, Burnout. Well, it's got two titles. Sorry, I should just mention that. The UK version is Burnout, How to Manage Your Nervous System Before It Manages You. And the US version has the original working title, which is The Trauma of Burnout, which perfectly blends my background as a trauma-trained psychologist. But yeah, just to mention, when I'm not in work, I have a family with 3 kids, 3 guinea pigs, which are wonderful system resets for me. Do you have pets, David?
I used to have a parakeet, but that's
Ah.
the extent of it. But I
um,
tell you, those are stressful too, because when we were doing podcasts, because I had a home office, the chirping would literally rip through the entire house.
it's not a very relaxing sound, is it? I imagine the pitch is quite like at that level that feels quite alarming.
Oh yeah, and they know when you're trying to do something. So
Right. Oh, see, the pigs will make a cute little kind of feemy sound, which is adorable rather than
yeah, the
scaring to see.
parakeet, I equate that to the when the battery dies in your smoke alarm
Right. Yeah, that's
at like 3
not a
a.m.
good
Yeah.
sound. Yeah.
No. So let's I wanna talk about I don't think many people, you jump on social media, I don't think you equate, burnout and trauma. Um,
Okay.
but so I think this is an important discussion for us to have and for people to listen to. But for those that may confuse stress and burnout, and I know
Sure.
obviously they're related,
Yeah.
um, but can we just define those
Sure.
briefly? Because I do know while one leads to the other, there is a difference, right?
Yeah, I mean, stress is the body's natural way of responding to incoming demands. And so the more demands that are being made on us, we can go into this place, which is, it can be quite a buzzy place. It's about energy. We have lots of energy suddenly online in order to respond. And that can provide quite good changes in the short term. We become cognitively more kind of focused, our immunity improves, we can become quite effective doing quite a lot of stuff, and we're not built to stay in that place. That's the main problem. So we can get very overengaged, we can get very urgent with our actions. But if we're in that place for too long, this is where it becomes the chronic stress. We burn through all that energy. And if we haven't come to a set of solutions before we get to the end of that, it starts to tip into this disengaged place. So that I'd say, if you just want a kind of a rule of thumb, regular stress is about overengagement. Burnout is when it's been chronic for too long, you've tipped into disengagement. So it's overengagement, disengagement. And this is much more of a hollow, empty place, where you might not have that full repertoire of emotions anymore. You're not coming back at any point to a kind of a green rest and digest place. You're kind of oscillating, we'll get into the colours in a minute, between this kind of amber urgency or red kind of shutdown, or maybe you're just stuck in red.
Yeah.
And of course, the official definition, the WHO definition, is that you would be ticking off the 3 kind of clusters within your usual kind of experience of stress. So they are kind of fatigue, emotional and physical fatigue, which kind of does what it says on the tin, really. And I think everybody kind
Right.
of gets that one. But in
Right.
terms of the emotional aspect of that, it is where you just don't have any other emotions other than anxiety or irritability. You're struggling with joy, you're struggling with passion or feeling content, all those kind of more positive emotions. You just don't have access to those. The second part of the cluster is that kind of detachment from work, feeling quite cynical or numb, just not engaged in the way that you're not caring anymore. Or only caring about one part, you're finding it hard to care about all of it. And then the third one is that you're just not as effective as you were before. Perhaps you are cutting corners, or you're not, doing your session plans anymore as detailed as you used to. Or also your self-esteem will plummet at this point. You might start to think, oh, I am a terrible therapist, or I am a terrible coach or teacher, or whatever it is. So you can feel a lot more imposter syndrome in this place as well.
Yeah. And I know for the majority of this community, busy adults with ADHD, demanding careers, kids, guinea pigs, what have
Yeah.
you, is that there is a little bit of a, I don't know, I guess a cloudy kind of area where many of us are already kind of challenged with executive functions. So we kind of operate, or some of us operate in that mode where we're already kind of, we're already at a deficit, so to speak, with executive functions. So, and I find that because of that, many people with ADHD do kind of almost get there faster, so to speak,
Mm,
just because of the way they operate. Maybe they did well in school and what have you, but now they get out in the real world and there's a lot of responsibilities, and the way they're working isn't working, so to speak. And then they get burned out just because of that kind of extra factor. Have you
yeah.
encountered that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's not an overnight thing, but it kind
Yeah.
of creeps up on you. And part of the skill in avoiding like clinical burnout, because I think a lot of people probably listening to this recognize they get stuck in that more high functioning burnout, which is when your body hasn't forced the stop, but you are hitting those markers of the three things I've just said.
Yeah.
And so you have a place there once you start to clock maybe this is burnout, to do something about that, which will take all your executive function, all your skills, and ability to check in and be introspective and work out what's going on. And if you're struggling with any of that, that's going to be hard. And alexithymia as well, where you kind of tuned in with what your body's feeling, if you need the toilet, if you need a rest, all of that can be really hard with
Yeah.
neurodivergence.
Yeah. So chronic stress leads to burnout. I think
Mhm.
I think a lot of us agree on that. But to your, obviously, to the title of your book and your work,
Yeah.
in past, you work a lot in trauma. So what is that chronic stress doing to our nervous system? Because here's what I know is, you can be stressed out and maybe you got a bunch of projects at work, and then you know you end up being able to take maybe a week off and go sit by the pool or go take a vacation or holiday. Um, and you come back and you're refreshed. And I don't really classify that as burnout. You were
Mm.
stressed out, you had a stressful period of time, you kind of repaired, so to speak, you're refreshed. But chronic stress, I think, is when we that doesn't help, correct?
Well,
And
also
then
when people are on their break, like you say, a lot of people will find it hard to switch off and
yeah.
take the break. They almost get a fear of switching off. I've recently come
Mm.
across this term, FOZO. Have you heard of it? Fear of switching off.
Wow, no.
And I
We gotta
think so.
add
I
that.
think a lot of people will take their laptop on holiday and feel like I can't not turn my laptop on. So there's kind of like, an inability to come down your gears into rest mode. You're almost just
Yeah.
stuck at that on all the time place, which partly adds up with why you're not getting any restful, breaks.
Hey, gang! Dave stepped out real quick to grab a cup of coffee, and if you know Dave, you know he doesn't even speak in the morning without a ton of coffee. So why don't you buy Dave his next cup of coffee? Go to buymeacoffee.com/overcomingd and get him that cup of coffee and support the show. Your support will help keep Dave awake and help keep those podcasts coming out on time. It's buymeacoffee.com/overcomingd. Okay, he's back.
What is that chronic stress? If we actually can't switch off, then we just come back and we just rinse and repeat, so to speak. So
Mm,
what is that doing to
to your
our
nervous
nervous
system.
system?
Mm,
Yeah, because again, I've talked to so many people that um, that have had, and I interviewed many in my book, where the digestive issues, the migraines, like one guy had a heart attack,
Yeah.
the cardiologist, before he put him on the operating table, he goes, "You should be dead." I mean, he worked himself almost to death. So what is this doing to our bodies?
Yeah, so it might be helpful to separate out the two things. There's our physical bodies and our autonomic nervous system, which is obviously part of that. But maybe I'll come to that bit in a minute because I know
Yeah.
we're going to talk about the colours. But in
Mm.
terms of the body, when we go into something stressful and our body's reacting with stress responses, the responses are designed to help us move quickly. So we have the extra energy and our heart rate goes up and the heart pressure goes up in order for us to get extra oxygen in quickly, so that our muscles are prepared for the fight or flight responses.
Yeah.
These are called allostatic changes, and like I say, they're designed for short-term bursts. All the blood flow, you mentioned your client with the digestive stuff, you see that a lot, don't you? IBS and all of these kind of issues are very stress related, because your digestion has been diverted away from the usual kind of digesting kind of all your food and going through nicely. All the blood is moved away to the extremities where it's needed for the responses to move quickly. So over time, this adds up to what's called allostatic load. So essentially you get this wear and tear. Your kind of systems, without the replenishing rest, start to struggle to recover from that wear and tear. And then they become weary and overactive. And this is where you kind of get this lethargy and your dulled reactions, that zoning out, numbing, which we see in burnout a lot. So that's the kind of the body. And this all has impacts, I talk about it in my book, on our ability to think clearly, because it's not just our body, it's a switch up in our brain as well. Even our functional IQ drops. We don't really realize we're not making good healthy decisions with all our faculties online for that, as well as wounds take longer to heal. All these it sounds almost shocking when people come to learn, because I think we separate out the body and brain, think they're two separate things, but literally everything slows down and doesn't work as it should under that chronic stress.
Right. And that's why I just, I I do it respectfully, but I think there's a lot of people on social media that are kind of capitalizing on, burnout hashtags, or creating content about, go to yoga, drink more water, set boundaries, all these things. But I push back gently and respectfully to kind of just what you just said, is that, if you're in true burnout, and this has been going on for a long time, there are other things going on, with your body,
Yeah.
and your life that are suffering. I didn't even think of the example of like wounds are taking longer to heal, but I guess that would make sense if your body's, maybe it's not shutting down, or maybe it is. Yeah.
And the stuff that you've just mentioned, boundary setting, yoga, journaling, all of these things, that you've basically touched on the point that was the reason I wrote this book, because I think those things, they are good, and I'm sure you agree, and I'm sure you use those in part of your coaching work as well, but I don't think they're the first thing you need. And I think it's hard for people when they see things like that online, thinking, oh, other people are just doing this, like saying no stuff, and that's working for them. I'm a failure because I can't do it. And so essentially what my book is about, actually, you just need the right self-care for where you are in your nervous system right now.
Yeah.
And you are not there yet. And that's why I don't even touch all of that stuff until right at the end of the book, because I need you to know how to navigate your nervous system to make the right decisions and tools. And that stuff is once you've got enough back online for your green mode in order to be able to do some of that work. And also to understand your own backstory, why things like that have been so difficult for you, because there'll be a reason. Like some people, they just need to learn the skills and then they can start saying no and setting boundaries. But for other people, it's visceral. It viscerally feels like unsafe to start doing that. So we can dip down. In therapy, we do that, and you're invited in the book to kind of create your own map of your backstory, like what went on for you early on, what made it tricky for you to set those boundaries. Because if you can understand those patterns and where they came from, you're much more likely to be compassionate with yourself when things are tricky to put in place.
Yeah. is what you just described the red mode that you talk about in your book?
Yeah, shall I go
Yeah.
through that now? Would that be helpful? Just
No, I
for the
think that's
map.
important because I think that would, and I like the way you did that because I think it does give people a sense of kind of where they are, right?
Yeah.
In terms of the, you know, we talk about the burnout scale and you know, in past books, but red mode is like red mode. It's like
We all know what color red is.
we know what red means.
Yeah. Red for stop and shut
Yeah.
down. Yeah. So I'm drawing here on polyvagal theory, just for anyone listening who knows that theory, which is like just goes a little deeper with the original stress model. Original stress model said there were two branches of our nervous system, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. Parasympathetic being the rest and digest green mode, where we are when we're kind of calm. We can manage, you know, anything coming in because they're not really highly stressful. So right now, for example, I'm in green mode, I think. Maybe started a little bit in amber because I, you know, was a bit stressed coming into a podcast, but now we've been chatting for a bit, which means that I can interpret your body language and your facial expressions well. And I can feel safe right now. And presumably my body's digesting its food normally. I can breathe kind of clearly.
Yeah.
So ideally, this is where we spend most of our time. And then the sympathetic nervous system was the bit which is amber, we switch into when there's a threat coming in, this the fight or flight. And a lot of kind of books that talk about stress in the past have talked about that original model. Polyvagal theory said that actually the parasympathetic branch, the first one, is a little bit more complicated. There's actually, it branches off into two. So there's technically three branches of our nervous system. And this came about in work with some, you know, well, Stephen Porges, who created this theory into like babies, and realizing that some babies were very distressed and actually, it sounds very unpleasant, but they were dying very early on in their early part of their life. And he was trying to explore what this was about. And he realized that actually there was this kind of dorsal shutdown part of the nervous system. And that's the red zone. That's essentially, if you have gone from green, rest and digest, stresses have come in, so you've had to switch into your sympathetic nervous system, which is the kind of fight or flight. If your attempts to resolve those stresses go unmet and you're still having the demands coming in, they gradually grind you down. The metaphor I use is like a tennis ball machine that you're trying to return the shots for. If you're rolling out this tennis machine, you're hitting your pieces back at the wall, and then another machine's rolled out, maybe that's problems with your kids at school, another tennis ball machine's rolled out and that's your elderly parents, another one's rolled out and it's your boss shouting at you. Suddenly you can't return all the balls, so you kind of are in this helpless situation where nothing you do will resolve. You'll go into this dorsal shutdown, which is the body's last kind of line of defense, really, to kind of energy drops down to conserve the energy. And in the animal kingdom, what you see here is the predator chasing the prey. The prey will just flop, and it can even stop its breathing. It looks dead. And what happens then? The predator, the thrill of the chase is over. It's not got its adrenaline pumping anymore. It will just wander off. So it's effective.
I can hear David Attenborough now.
Oh yeah, good. I'll just drop my voice down and yeah, national treasure. So yeah, and that works. And in humans, obviously, well, we in highly traumatized clients, you will see this dissociation in the room where someone will become very kind of scared looking. They might, you know, if you're talking about traumas, they will drop into this in a way that is more obvious. But in burnout, I think we're dropping into this in a way that's kind of almost high functioning enough that we can get away with masking it to others. We're disengaged, we're zoning out. So, you know, it might look like someone's bored, for example. That can be a good indication that someone is in that place when they look like a bit vacant, they're not really listening. And or if you're going through it, you know, a sign you might be going through it is that you just don't feel connected, like you're on autopilot, like you're floating, and like, you know, your kids are talking to you, but you don't really care as much. Like, you know, you might say, oh, I love being with them, but I don't really, I love them, but I don't really enjoy being with them. It's that kind of level of disconnection. So this is the red that I'm talking about. And
you mentioned kind of workplace factors like boss and clients and, you know, all these kind of factors and deadlines. And but as I think you've mentioned and I mentioned as well, I mean, you could replace those, maybe trigger's the wrong word, but those factors in it,
Stressors.
yeah,
Yeah.
stressors into a caregiving responsibility. Somebody has an
Mm.
aging parent, and something happens and they have to take them to the emergency room,
Yeah.
or unexpected doctor's
Yeah.
visits, and things begin to become a little out of control and unpredictable, which I would think is a major factor in stress, right? Because there's some uncertainty, right?
I mean, yeah, I mean, a lot of people find we humans don't like uncertainty because it's a
Yeah,
sense of not knowing what's going to come around the corner next. And our ancestors didn't like that. So we like routine, we like certainty. And I think what you've just said there is, those little things quite often are the reason someone then comes to therapy and they'll be confused. Like, why did this one thing, why was that the straw that broke the camel's back? And it's because that was, the final ball machine to be rolled in amongst all the other ones.
right.
Because they've got no bandwidth to deal with all of that, because they're so stretched already, it doesn't take very much at that point for it to all kind of fall apart.
Yeah. No, and I can see that where it begins to, and I've always equated this, and again, it could be work, it could be ADHD and maybe not managing it properly, it could be caregiving, it could be where it's like it's the little things pile up and pile up and pile up. And then it's that one little thing that finally just, you know, it could be a stressful phone call with a client or your parent's doctor, and in the grand scheme of things, it probably wasn't much, but it was just like, oh my God, one more thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And by then, your nervous system is so stuck on amber or possibly red that resting and recuperating in the face of that and being compassionate with like, that was a hard phone call, or I took my mum to the hospital. I need to maybe go and have a cup of tea and sit down. Like,
Yeah.
those things aren't the things that people are doing at that point. They're frenzied mode. They're kind of back on it, and work can become a distraction from that
Yeah.
pain, that emotional pain. And I talk about that in the book, that actually that's one of the patterns, internal patterns I often see, is the difficulty with sitting with emotional pain and using work to kind of push through and cope. So recognizing that if that's a pattern in you, you are higher risk for burning out.
Yeah. So how do we start the process of changing the color, so to speak, and getting into a mode
Yeah.
where we can not only function but thrive and not experience all the trauma? Because I think there was one thing that was clear in a lot of the people I interviewed for overcoming burnout, and we kind of came up with this phrase where we're kind of co-founders of our burnout. And I think in a
Okay.
lot of situations there are certainly things you can't control. And I'm a believer in, nor should you try, because those are the things that are just somewhat out of your control. But there are some things, again, whether it's work or even your caregiving, where there's a certain amount of control we can exert instead of just, I think my friend Diane called it the stop, drop, and roll, where we just get used to being in that. But I think if a lot of us really just sat down and looked at our situation, we could find at least a handful of things that we could kind of take back control, right? And do those types of things get us into a mode
Back
that
into,
has a
yeah.
has a better
Yeah.
color?
Um, Yeah, I want to answer that question, but I crossed my fingers so I didn't forget to say this, because as you were speaking, I realized I hadn't said this, and it's important. We don't want to demonize any of the branches of the nervous system because they're all important. They all have a role for human survival.
Yeah.
And also that you can get blended states just to confuse things. So, for example, when we're playing and having fun, which we know is really protective of burnout,
Yeah.
it's a blended state between green and amber. It's when amber and red are online without any green that we're in a more dangerous kind of place, for a long time. And then also red dorsal kind of rest mixed with green. That's a really replenishing level of rest. That's maybe when you're not kind of socializing, having a nice. So I might get into that if I've had a bath and then I kind of go a bit all sleepy, and I might be able to just literally sit and gaze up at the ceiling for ages without really kind of feeling, oh, I should be doing stuff. I can get much more easily into that kind of restful place at a time like
Yeah.
that. So just wanted to not demonize any of the things. It's more about important to think about the fluidity of moving up and down these kind of colors. And I talk about like a gear stick in a gear shift box. What do you call it in America? We call it a manual car.
Yeah,
Stick shift.
you're right. It's
Yeah.
stick shift. Yeah,
Yeah.
which there's probably people of a certain age over here that don't even understand what we're talking about.
Okay, think about bike gears then.
But every time I've rented a car over in the UK, yes, I've had to. And I grew up, driving with a clutch, so I knew how to do that. But yes, so go on.
So you want the fluidity up and down the gears. You don't want to be stuck in any gear. That's the problem. It's the rigidity. So in answer to your question about are we co-founders of our burnout, I think it's always complex, and psychologists are annoying because we'll always say it's yes and no, depends. I mean, you'll get people obviously stuck in really tricky kind of public sector jobs, like over here it's like the NHS, like doctors, nurses, social workers, and all of that have so much stress coming in, probably less choice and over their decisions and what their day look like. Yeah. But it's still not impossible. And what I do in my work, even if you are in a situation like that, is to try and separate out those external pressures to your internal pressures that are making you behave in ways that reinforce burnout patterns. And so the burnout patterns that I pull out in my book are, perfectionism, unrelenting standards, which, even when you meet, you're hard on yourself and you never delegate. You always do the things that other people could be doing. Perfectionism, people pleasing is the second one. So literally putting your needs at the bottom of the pile to the point that you maybe don't even know what they are anymore. That's really common. When you say to someone, what do you want? What do you need? People just don't know. And it's quite a scary question. And then the final one, which I've already alluded to, was that kind of using busyness to avoid feelings. So having a poor relationship with your emotions. And so I talk about in my book, if you can identify these patterns, and you might tick a few of these patterns, understand where they came from, what shaped you can make more informed decisions when demands are coming in at you. For example, I use the example in the book of a teacher who is saying yes when people are off ill to doing their kind of playground duty, and actually she can just sit on that and not be the one. Nobody will look down on her. So there might be these little kind of wiggle rooms, but the biggest thing I think you can do is learn the skill of self-compassion, because that's very broad, and I talk about all the different ways that looks in the book. It's essentially responding to your distress from a place of understanding and wanting to support yourself, like a lot of people do for other people, but rarely turn it on themselves. They're often the opposite, quite cold or blamey, or like, I shouldn't be doing this. All these types of really unhelpful inner critics will show up when life is hard. So it's kind of like, how do your external pressures that you might have less control of, how do you respond to those with your internal pressures, and where's the kind of little bit of give there? And there absolutely is, because people can get better from this.
Yeah. And I think what I see over and over again in this community, busy adults with ADHD, is there are, I like to say that, when I work with somebody one-on-one, and I'm not a therapist, I'm not a clinician, I'm far from it. I'm an entrepreneur with ADHD, but we try to work on the mechanics of these things. Like, for example, if somebody just has no method to, scheduling their days and their weeks and their months, and they're just plugging things into their schedule, and they're popping from a meeting to trying to work on a big project, and then back to a meeting, and then, they're just plugging holes, and that's the way they manage their professional schedule. That over time does get tiring. It gets exhausting.
Well, that's more external pressures coming in, isn't it? Because you have no system. Systems really do save us. Yes.
Yeah. So I think and those are the things that I talk about, that we can take back control. It's just like, I have no thought process when I just manage my work. I get up, I show up, I walk in the office, and I just start working, and I do that week after week after month after month, and it's not sustainable. And those are the things that we can, the mechanical side, where we can actually take back control, I believe. So
it's so worth the investment to do that, because I think a lot of people feel like, I don't have time to do that, but it's it's working on that mindset, because once you take those steps to put in systems, they're so containing. It's that kind of routine. It's knowing where you're at. It's knowing that next Tuesday will be when you do this meeting, because you always do it at that time. It gives your nervous system a break from having to make decisions all the time. You know, you can have certain decisions at one point, you're making them all in one go, and then you can just, you know, ride the day out as the way you've set it when you were calm, doing those systems thing when you're calm.
Yeah. Yeah. As we wrap up, I always like to give people just some action items, so to speak. So things that they can, you know, listen to as we wrap up, that they can either try and put into action or think about, or
Okay.
just get them thinking. So if somebody's listening to our conversation and all this resonates with them and they say, yeah, that's me, that's what's going on, what are some of the first things you would advise people to do if they feel like some of the descriptions we just talked
Okay.
about? Yeah.
Mine always spins like so many. What's the quick bite size? I'm wondering if you got to chapter 5 of my book yet. Chapter 5 is quite practical, so maybe I draw on that, because it's about, if you can know where you are in your nervous system from some of the descriptions I've said, particularly if you're quite frantic and busy and you feel like I don't even have time to do anything, that says to me that you're in your amber, in your sympathetic mode. The more urgent everything feels and the harder everything feels to pause, is the sign that you need to do it to reset your nervous system. Because if you can think about, your goal is to get to the end of the day not so wired that you can't fall asleep or wind down from work. You need to have a replenishing rest at the end of the day. But so many people crash from one thing to another in the same nervous system mode without kind of just taking the pressure down and resetting themselves. So I guess I'm just inviting people to do something really practical when they notice they're feeling really urgent. This is a sign you're in your nervous system, sympathetic nervous system. There's a lot of adrenaline and a lot of energy here. So discharge it. That's what we do in therapy. We discharge it. So if someone comes into a therapy session, they're all over the place. We don't try and do the session plan that I have planned. We do something to try and bring them back to me. So, you know, it's usually something quite practical. You know, I'm moving my body a lot. I don't know, people can't see it, but I'm already starting to do it. So like stretching, shaking, you know, with the animal kingdom will shake after the chase.
Yeah.
You know, if you feel less silly, running them down the stairs a few times. And I teach cross crawl as well in the book, which is when you kind of basically you're crossing the midline with your arm touching, your right arm touching your left knee, and then vice versa. So within your body's capabilities, don't push yourself. You should just do a little bit so that you're pleasantly tired. When you're pleasantly tired, you've probably burnt through that adrenaline. You can more likely to be able to kind of anchor yourself back in the present before you start the next activity.
Yeah.
And equally, if you're quite shut down, just to say something, what you need then is something more about thinking like you would if you were an ice block. You need gentle thawing out. So then I use touch a lot with people, as in invite them to kind of give themselves a self hug. That's where, you know, if I've had a really heavy clinic on a Tuesday, it's my usually face-to-face, lots of kind of heavy trauma. I come home and I just give my guinea pigs lots of hugs, and that kind of thaws me out. So connection.
Yeah.
And kind of touch a really good way to start thawing out.
Yeah. I always use the example that when I didn't want to go to the gym, when I just like dreaded it, and then I got there, I get one of the best workouts ever. And that tells me that I needed it. You know, it got to the point like I don't want to leave. It's like I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to stay for an hour and a half, I want to use this machine. It's just like, but it's just like I go from I can't even get in the car to when I get there, I don't want to leave, and I feel 100 times better than if I just went on like an ordinary day. That tells me that I needed that. And I think to your point,
that's the
that
thing.
was the evidence. Yeah.
For moving up and down your gears, you often don't feel like doing the thing that will bring you into a different gear, because you're kind of acting opposite of what the body wants. The body, you know, feels urgent. It wants to keep moving because the stresses aren't suddenly stopping. But it's not a good idea to try and get to the end of your to-do list before you stop and rest, because for most people there isn't really an end. There's always going to be more. You could always just switch gear, and that's the thing. You're getting kind of this hit of adrenaline, dopamine that keeps pushing you to do the next item. So you know, you do need to do exactly that. even if you don't feel like it, try and do something that will switch gears. So working in sympathy with the nervous system is essentially what we're talking about here. There's loads of other ideas, but hopefully that's something practical people can try.
Yeah.
And the second thing they can go and try is listening or reading my book. It's available on Audible as well if they're podcasters and they like being talked to.
Great. All right. We will have the link to the book in the notes here. And if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
So I'm at Dr. Claire Plumbly on lots of the social medias, like Instagram, like I said, Substack, TikTok, LinkedIn. I have a website as well at Dr. Claire Plumbly. You're welcome to look at.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks.
Well, thank you. This was an important discussion because, like I said, we've talked a lot about the mechanics of burnout, but I'm glad we were able to talk about kind of a deeper, understanding of burnout and what it does to us. So thank you so much for coming on and connecting.
Thanks. I loved having this chat with you.